Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Today's discussion is motivated by an article that I encountered just now in The Economist. This article is titled "The Disposable Academic," and it confirms certain thoughts that I have had for over 4 years now with regard to the value or lack thereof for many people of pursuing a Doctor of Philosophy or PhD degree in today's economy. Now, for some background, I myself am an individual who has chosen not to pursue a PhD, and this is despite being valedictorian of my high school class and salutatorian of my college class, graduating with 3 majors in economics, mathematics, and German. Now, you might expect that I was the kind of person who was encouraged to go ahead and pursue a graduate degree, preferably a PhD, and I got a lot of recommendations to do that from professors with whom I had developed very respectful relationships and who have taught me a lot during my time in college. Also, this is not to say that I wouldn't have enjoyed some aspects of pursuing a PhD, but I ultimately decided against it. And this article really confirms a lot of the thinking that I had at the time. This article describes the plight of the PhD student and the implicit reverse Faustian bargain that seems to have been struck between the PhD students, and in some cases unions representing PhD students, and the academicians who instruct PhD students and get a lot of cheap, disposable, efficient, and highly motivated labor out of them, while paying them way below what similar kinds of work would command in the job market if performed for, say, a corporation or a public entity. And it's very interesting. This article states that for every 100,000 PhD students that obtain their degrees, there are 16,000 new professorial openings that are available, which means that on average only 16% of these new PhDs actually get a position in academia. Now, some of them go into business, but it's pretty clear that a lot of the skills that they obtain in the PhD program aren't particularly relevant to the business environment where they work. And it's quite likely that a certification that's more relevant to that particular profession would be just as suitable in terms of giving them those job-specific skills, and it would also be less expensive and less time-consuming. I would say the big tragedy with regard to the plight of these PhD students is they spend so much of their time, 4 years of perhaps the most energetic and the most productive decade of their lives, advancing themselves very little, given the very diminished prospects that a PhD now commands in the job market. Studies have shown that the value added for most PhDs isn't that much greater than the value added by an undergraduate degree or a master's degree, and in some cases, it's even value diminished in terms of the average earning potential of a PhD graduate as compared to a master's graduate or a bachelor's graduate. So this is, of course, contrary to what a lot of bright, promising, and highly motivated students have been told. And I would say it's the greatest tragedy for the best of the best, the kinds of students who have always done well academically and who, because of the peculiar societal and cultural expectations of U.S. academia and the culture at large that generally takes for granted this academic hierarchy, they're pigeonholed into these PhD programs. And in these PhD programs, they are treated only a little bit better than slave labor. It's quite uncertain whether one will get one's degree. It depends on the disposition of one's doctoral advisor, and this individual may sometimes be highly motivated to advance his advisee's future, or at other times there may be unexplained delays of months of getting one's thesis reviewed. And of course, unlike colleges, graduate schools do not engage in the equivalent of an advanced placement program where if one takes certain kinds of courses in undergraduate school, one can receive credit for them in graduate school provided that one has proved oneself to be knowledgeable and competent. High school AP credits give a large boost to college students who want to pursue more advanced subjects of study after demonstrating their competence in earlier levels of those subjects. There's no equivalent in graduate school, so very often graduate students need to retake and repeat the same courses that they took as undergraduates, and in my honest opinion, this is a ploy by the graduate schools to extract more money from the majority of the students. Those students who are fortunate enough to receive a stipend or some kind of fellowship usually end up doing the bulk of the work at the graduate school, mostly teaching the courses to other graduate students, and in return for that privilege, they get to live perhaps at most on $30,000 a year. Compare that to the entry-level wage that a lot of these same people would be able to command if they took their undergraduate degrees and just went out into the workforce. So all of these thoughts led me to remember a remark that another respected instructor of mine, a business education teacher in high school, used to make. And this man was very unusual for a high school teacher, and unusual in an admirable way. He was often very frank with regard to his comments about the value of an academic education. He remarked one day that, well, it's nice to be able to quote Kant at a cocktail party, but the majority of the world's money seems to be made by C students. And yet, he also acknowledged that it's not because those C students have any kind of special skills or talents that the A students lack. It seems to me, after further reflection on his comments in conjunction with the way the academic hierarchy pigeonholes the most motivated students into paths that are not by far the most advantageous to them, it's precisely because these individuals are channeled away from the most lucrative paths and the most lucrative opportunities, leaving those to the C students. The C students aren't expected to go on to get a PhD. They might be expected to get an undergraduate degree just because that's now a basic certificate of competency for most employers, very unfortunately, and I've argued in other videos that this should never have been the case, and it's quite a mistaken expectation. But these individuals get their start in the working world much sooner. They get valuable skills and valuable experience, and they get more money to start off with. Even if you consider the slight, very slight premium that some PhDs will be able to earn an individual over his lifetime, as opposed to what he might have gotten with a bachelor's degree, consider that as compared to the higher earnings that that same individual could have received if he had worked for 4 years instead. I would say In most cases, the latter number is in excess of the former. So this is, I think, very instructive with regard to today's young people and the plight that they're facing with a very difficult economic situation. The unemployment rate in the United States is tremendous. And it's tremendous because of the errors of elites of earlier generations. Nobody in the current young generation, nobody in their 20s right now, had a hand in this economic crisis. And yet this generation is the one that is suffering the most. And understandably, many young people today seek shelter from the uncertainties of the job market by going to graduate school, by trying to prolong their so-called education in hopes of perhaps emerging into a saner job market. However, perhaps this is not the best choice. I wouldn't say this for every particular case. It requires a knowledge of personal circumstances. For instance, if one really is outstanding at teaching and believes that a career in academia is one's best and most preferred option, then certainly getting a PhD is advantageous. But in any other case, it would seem that the costs outweigh the benefits. Now, granted, it's very difficult to find paid employment with any kind of large organization these days. The ratio of new hires to job applicants is small and decreasing. There's another very fascinating article that I've linked to from the New York Times that is titled "No Jobs, Young Graduates Make Their Own," which is about entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurship in this generation. It gives a few examples of young people who, in this environment, in this very uncertain economy, have decided that their best prospects lie with their own entrepreneurship and their own initiative. And this, I would say, is the most hopeful development for our time. These young people do not require the good graces of some organization in order to help them rebuild this economy, to create what I like to call an alternative economy to replace the decaying economic structure that led up to the economic crisis and that continues through bailouts, subsidies, and barriers to entry to plague our economy and our society. The rampant abuses and predations of the large banks, for instance, with the fraudulent foreclosures that are currently happening, with the raids on the homes of people who have never missed a mortgage payment or who might not even have a mortgage with that bank. Those are the fruits of the culture of bailout and institutionalized special privileges, and only the culture of technological entrepreneurship, low capital entrepreneurship by young people, can resolve it. I was fortunate in this economic crisis to be able to get a job, and quite a well-paying job at that. The reason why I was able to do that without going to graduate school is because during college, on my own time, I pursued actuarial examinations. And I pursued that path to a certification that didn't depend on anybody else's schedule. It depends on one's own initiative, one's own willingness to study. And really, preparation for these exams is a self-study endeavor. And there are many other designations, both in the field of insurance and outside of that field, that rely on one's own learning and one's own initiative. These may be worthwhile to pursue for individuals who do not wish to get into a PhD program, but who are thinking of either launching a career with some established organization or making their own. Some of these certifications may be good, for instance, if one wants to have a consulting practice, or if one wants to independently provide services as a small business that a lot of organizations, large and small, provide today. So there are opportunities out there outside of the conventional hierarchy that bright young people are expected to follow and are channeled into. With the rise of electronic technology, many of these hierarchies and expectations are simply becoming obsolete. And of course, with extensive federal subsidies channeled into higher education, particularly at the college level, the college degree has become devalued by the fact that so many people who previously would never have gone to college are now being paid to do it, and a lot of these people spend 4 years partying, not learning anything, just doing it for the diploma. And unfortunately, the title of student, which used to carry so much respect even as late as the early 20th century, has now become almost derogatory. Like, oh, he's just a student. He hasn't seen the real world. He doesn't know how the real world operates. Staying in a PhD program simply perpetuates this insular world, this lack of connection to the skills that are really necessary in order to get things done. Entrepreneurship is the best way to get out of that insular environment and to really experience what it takes to contribute value. This is not to say that a PhD has no value at all to certain people. Some people might say, well, I do it for the knowledge. I do it for the experience. I do it because I enjoy it. And I say that's great. But at that point, a PhD becomes a consumption good, not an investment good into one's future. It's more akin to leisure or entertainment. You do it if you can afford it. You do it if you have time. But survival, material security come first. And that's where I think it's a fundamental mistake to channel so many people into PhDs. If you want to have a leisure class of PhD students who are genuinely there because the love of knowledge and the pursuit of truth is what they want to do, and that group could pursue PhDs along with the group that wants to do academic teaching as a career, then that's great. If you want to open up more opportunities for PhD students, then repeal the silly laws that require one to have a certificate in education in order to teach at a public school. Right now, if one has a PhD in chemistry, one cannot teach a chemistry class in a public high school. One has to have a certificate of education in order to do that. One can teach chemistry at a college or a university, but not at a public high school. And isn't that ridiculous? Someone who has a certificate in education, but doesn't have a degree in chemistry, doesn't have anything except an elementary, basic, and perhaps very flawed knowledge of chemistry, can teach chemistry in high school. Isn't that ridiculous? While there are so many unemployed chemistry PhDs out there.